property rights, legal research methodology, to name a few subjects from his large forte. He served as a professor and dean of Faculty of Law, University of Mysore, acting chancellor of University of Mysore for 4 months, and vice chancellor of the West Bengal National University of Juridical Science, Kolkata. Professor Bhatt has also made a phenomenal mark in foreign universities as a Fulbright Nehru visiting faculty and co-teacher in Columbus Law School and Catholic University of America, visiting lecturer at Queen's University, Canada. Sir is a recipient of the Shastri Research Faculty Award, researching in York, Toronto, and Ottawa universities on language rights. Sir has presented papers in more than 100 national and international seminars. Two prominent papers I would like to mention here are paper on education in mother tongue presented at Kathmandu and Indian constitutional development, a paper he presented at Islamabad. He has also published 115 research articles in national and international journals and books. Professor Bhatt has also authored books on non-profit voluntary organization laws, law and social transformation, fundamental rights, etc. Sir, it is indeed an honor to have such a luminary amongst us for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I request Dr. Ishwar Bhatt, sir, to give the keynote address.
Very good morning to all the dignitaries. First, let me give my humble and very sincere salutations to Deshabhakta Ratna Aparna Kumbar, who had made a very significant contribution to the public life, to the educational activities, and for the establishment of this Shahaji Law College. He was responsible. Shahaji Maharaj is known for social justice activities, and in his name, when a college is established, that college is very much justified in organizing these types of seminars. Today's topic that is taken for a discussion under the sponsorship of National Commission for Women is of great significance. Let me also mention Principal R. Narayan, then various other dignitaries, Professor Patil from Goa, then Praveen Patil, and various other colleagues, as well as members of faculty and students. The topic of today's discussion gains a lot of significance for the reason that it is through protection of human rights that women's rights become strong. And when women are the victims of poverty, when they become migrant workers, that difficulty gets exacerbated. That difficulty is multiplied several times, because they will not be able to have access to various means through which they can get protections. Getting protection against various types of exploitations is one of the important privilege under the law, and our legal system, which is known for a very vibrant and dynamic way of protecting the vulnerable section of the society, has to come to the help of women, especially the migrant working women. Migrant working women constitute a big chunk of a population. The very population of migrant laborers in India is estimated in 2011 as around 45 crores, out of which 42% are women. And migrant women workers serve in different capacities as domestic servants, as nurses, or as babysitters, or as construction workers, or uh, say sweepers, or persons who are serving in different capacities. Further, they involve in a number of voluntary activities. I mean, self-employment activities, like say vegetable selling, or hawking, or various other types of activities. In such a situation, protecting them against various types of discriminations becomes very much important. Our labor law is mainly concentrating on the male workers. When we look into the aspects of Factories Act or other legislations, more attention is given to the male section of the society. But by interpreting in a very creative way, the Supreme Court in a Vishaka case laid down number of guidelines about protection of working women against sexual harassment in the workplace. When no specific right is recognized under any ordinary law, creating that legal norm under a constitution by interpreting international human rights principles became quite important. It was handy, and it resulted in a very revolutionary development. And the Act of 2013 is an incorporation of those Vishaka principles. In this way, the women workers can be given all types of assistances. For example, maternity benefit is one such a aim. One such a goal that is aimed at under the Constitution. And when a legislation like a Maternity Benefit Act is to be applied, it is to be interpreted. By interpreting in the light of Article 21 and 14 of the Constitution, the court considered that it is applicable even to persons who are not regular in service. Those temporary workers are also entitled to those rights. In one of the cases, a case decided in early 1980s, there's a People's Union for Democratic Rights versus Union of India. There, the Supreme Court interpreted Interstate Migrant Workers Act in such a way that the women workers who are migrant laborers are also entitled to certain protections. There's a protection against discrimination in a payment of wages, or say non-payment of wages, or a payment of wages lesser than that is prescribed under a Minimum Wage Act. Concerning these types of things, remedies were provided under that judgment. What I intend to emphasize is that with a very creative judiciary, it is possible to convert the existing legal framework to better protect the interests of women. At the international arena, much development has taken place relating to protection of interests of migrant working women. The International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights gives emphasis on equality in treatment of both men and women in matters relating to employment, holding of property, wages, or various other benefits under labor law. So labor law shall operate in such a way that it shall bring benefit to both men and women. That is the concern of International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights. When a Convention on Eradication of Discrimination Against Women was concluded, it became a trendsetter in the women's rights regime, because relating to protection of rights of women within the family, or in the society, or in the political system, or in a workplace. SEDA provided for very important types of protections. It acknowledges that during poverty, women's interests get jeopardized more, and it is essential that their interests should be very effectively protected. Then relating to the extension of various types of welfare schemes for women, like say fixation of hours of work, or about the conditions in work. They shall not be subject to hazardous types of works, or about decency that is to be maintained in a workplace, and even about avoidance of various types of harassments in a workplace. About this, we come across some provisions in a Convention on Eradication of Discrimination Against Women. In a elaborating this particular convention, or in bringing effect to this convention later, in 1981 or so, it was regarded that the interests of women can be considered in a more objective manner, or their interests can be better protected only when the female migrants could be studied from several perspectives. It points out that it should be studied from the perspective of gender equality. So when migrant women workers' problems are to be understood, it is essential that there is a situation, there is a goal of a gender equality that shall be promoted. From that angle, we have to examine the whole issue. Then the traditional role of women is confined to kitchen or household affairs. But regarding works outside the family, whether it is in farms or factories or offices or other places, the role of women also not that much recognized traditionally. It was regarded that it is the domain of the men, and after a lot of developments, especially due to education or economic development, social development, and political realization, etc., the position of women got improved, and they began to enter into various spheres of employment or work outside the family. So when we understand the position of migrant women workers, we have to take into consideration this aspect also, that there is a shift from the traditional role of woman to the modern role, where she provides various services to the society. Then we have to take into consideration the factor of a gendered labor market. The labor market is more in favor of men rather than women even now, because insofar as lucrative works or prominent works, or works which are considered as a first grade, or of a higher level, or better recognized ones, etc. These are cornered by men, whereas menial jobs, or the works of a secondary grade, or works which are just helping other sections of the society, etc. These are done by women. This gender labor market is twisted, or it is biased against women. This factor should also be taken into account. Then we should also consider that there is a universal prevalence of violence in the labor market. Further, there is a feminization of poverty. There is a poverty is a impacting upon, or it has such a adverse effect upon women rather than men. That's in the context of the migrant laborers, we have to take into consideration these factors. In fact, United Nations Convention on Protection of all forms of migrant laborers, formulated in 1990, became a very important step in the protection of the migrant workers. And in that convention, we come across several provisions which make a reference to protection of the interests of migrant workers and their family members. And migrant workers include both men and women. See, that convention is applicable insofar as the workers who are working in an international context. That's workers who have moved from one country to another country and providing service in that country. That convention is applicable. Of course, for Indian women also it is applicable, for the reason that number of women, especially from Kerala, Maharashtra, or Tamil Nadu, especially from coastal area, or even from Karnataka, people go to the Middle East, Kuwait, Dubai, and a number of other places. Even in England and other countries, they provide service. In America, Australia, or other countries also, they provide various types of services. Sometimes there are service of menial type. Sometimes there are technical skilled type, or there are something relating to institutions, cleanliness and such things. But still, it's a very valuable service. The service of nurses or service of doctors is very valuable service. Now, so they are put into various types of disadvantages, like denial of a maternity benefit, or denial of a right to education on the part of children, or a cultural atmosphere, or when they are denied of regular service benefits. In all such circumstances, they are discriminated. Thus, against those types of discriminations, this particular convention operates. The treatment that shall be accorded by the host nation or the receiving nation should be not less than any of the protections that are given to the members of their own community. That's the principle, that's the egalitarian principle that is to be followed. We come across a number of instances where, owing to various types of exploitations, sexual or otherwise, the migrant women workers in the Middle East began to flee from one employer to some other employer, or they sought asylum in the embassy, Indian embassy, and Indian embassy either repatriated such woman, or it provided for certain types of protection so that her interests will be protected. Thus, when any migrant woman worker is put into various types of such difficulties, there is this international convention that is operating. This particular international convention is not yet ratified by the government, but it is essential. Of course, when we discuss it today, we have to point out that there is a gap in the field of law because of not being a signatory to this convention. And after the Bangalore Declaration, as well as Vishaka and various other types of cases, when the courts have the responsibility of implementing the international conventions, it should also have that obligation to implement this convention, because of which a big change can take place, and that change is something to the better interests of women, and that kind of transformation is going to bring a better human rights protection. Then, insofar as the domestic law is concerned, there is a Interstate Migrant Labor Act, but this legislation is applicable only to the workers who are interstate migrants. But for migrants within the state, there's a inter-district or intra-district. This legislation is not applicable. And this legislation has a limited policy of providing certain types of allowances for transport, or for protecting against discriminations and such other things. But various special benefits that are to be provided to the migrant workers, especially migrant women workers. This legislation is a not full-fledged legislative framework at all. That's why the general labor law will have to be taken into consideration, and women are entitled to various protections under the ordinary law. Many of the works in which the migrant women will be engaging themselves are belonging to unorganized sector instead of organized sector. If it is an organized sector, then of course Industrial Disputes Act, Minimum Wage Act, and so many other legislations will be applicable. And there is a need to expand the scope of a Minimum Wages Act. Now we have the wage code, and it is essential that the interests of the working women, migrant working women, shall be effectively taken into account, and it should be adequately protected. I am quite confident that today's eminent speakers will be pointing out various lacuna or a gap in the present law, and suggesting about the reform that is to be done. Of course, it is through discussions, deliberations, and interactions that the policy formulation becomes more objective. It's essential to consider various viewpoints. The judiciary during pandemics has provided number of remedies to migrant workers. When we go through the photographs of the migrant workers just walking on the street in a huge number, we find that women workers are also persons who suffered because of this COVID, and as migrant workers, they had to carry their children and household things and walk with their spouses to faraway places. See, Relating to such circumstance, the remedy given by the uh, legal system was something not very satisfactory. Of course, about the providing of food, medicine, or shelter, drinking water, or then subsequently providing a free transport service, arranging trains, and such things were done. But they were not adequate, because once they go to the uh, place of return, or a place from which they had come as migrant workers, then of course there is a need to rehabilitate them, settle them, and they should be able to earn their livelihood in a decent manner. From that perspective, the legal system has exhibited certain lacuna. The Supreme Court has also pointed out some of the limitations of the existing law, and it has pointed out that it is essential to protect the interests of uh, migrant workers, treating them in a humane manner, because the basic principle of labor law is that labor is not a commodity. Workers are human beings. Treat the workers in a humane manner. It is essential that their natural expectations relating to uh, psychobiological demands will be adequately satisfied. It is not a mere wage. Providing various other types of good working condition, that is also becoming quite important. See, another important sphere of migrant workers problem, especially migrant women workers problem, is that many of the migrant workers, they are involving in providing sex work as their service. They may be working as prostitutes, or providing that service of a sex worker. See, from the place where they were born or brought up to some other place, when they are transported, hired, kidnapped, or when they were taken in such a way that there was the application of a coercion, fraud, inducement, and various other types of pressures for the purpose of sexual exploitation or economic exploitation or various other types of exploitations, then there arises a situation of trafficking. Palermo Convention of 1990 again has laid down a definition of this term trafficking, and in 2013, Indian Penal Code incorporated one provision relating to this trafficking. I mean, for the first time, there was the introduction of the definition of the term trafficking, and persons who had involved in the offense of trafficking, I mean, commission of the offense of trafficking, are subject to punishments. It is essential that the interests of such victims of trafficking should be considered as interests that shall be protected from the angle of the human rights in general. That's why there is a need to bring certain reforms in the field of law relating to trafficking, so that various spheres of work in which a woman is involved will be free from various types of hazards, harassments, exploitations, and other things which uh, bring the dignity of woman into severe constraint. Today's webinar will throw much light on various important aspects. The expectations of founding persons like Ratnapanna Kumbar will be properly realized when we take into consideration the interests of vulnerable sections, delve in depth into various issues so that relating to the problems that are faced by migrant women workers, at least some solutions could be found. I hope that the webinar will be moving towards that direction. With these words, I am expressing my happiness to inaugurate the seminar and also to express my best wishes to the success of the seminar. I'm very much grateful to the principal and management for having given this opportunity of participating in a virtual manner. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Suchita madam to give the vote of thanks for this session.
Thank you, Asmita. Thank you, sir. Sir, you have very rightly pointed out to the fact that the condition of women labor deserves a greater attention than actually given. Also, the fact that the scope left for interpretation in the laws should not result in discrimination and neglect, but rather in gender equality, which is also one of the 30 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations set for the year 2030. Thank you, sir. You have certainly set a very apt tone for the webinar by your insights into various laws, conventions, legislations in the context of how they will change the conditions of the women labor class. On behalf of the Council of Education, Shahaji Law College, I express my sincere and deepest appreciation to Professor Ishwar Bhatt sir for his presence and keynote address at this national webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we shall begin the first session. I request Dr. MC Sheikh sir to introduce our first resource person, Shri Pankaj Deshpande sir.
Thank you, madam. Good morning to all of you. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce resource person for first technical session, Honorable Senior Judge Sri Pankaj K. Deshpande, in this national webinar on migrant women workers and labor laws, identifying gaps and exploring legal remedies, on the eve of the 8th anniversary of our founder father of Council of Education, Sahakar Maharshi, Padma Shri Deshbhakta Dr. Ratnapanna Kumbar. Honorable Sri Pankaj K. Deshpande sir is a noted meritorious student during his legal education. His commitment and passion towards law education is noteworthy, and I am fortunate to witness for the same as a teacher of him. The reward of his painstaking intellectual labor resulted in the form that he stood first in merit in 5-year law course in Swami Ramananda Tirtha Marathwada University, Nanded. Sir had joined his judicial services in 2006 and served in Mumbai, Pune, and Aurangabad cities. He has having 14 years experience in judicial administration. Rightly, he has been elevated as a Honorable Secretary, District Legal Services Authority, DLSA, Kolhapur, in District and Session Court, Kolhapur. He has been invited as a resource person and guest faculty in national, state, university, and college level platform on the various topics relating to the weaker section of the society. Sir love to share and interact with the students, particularly law students, in many occasions without any kind of formality. Such a generous and humble personality is amongst us for this very webinar to enlighten on role of policies and legislation vis-a-vis migrant women workers. I take privilege to welcome Honorable Senior Judge and Secretary, District Legal Services Authority, DLSA, Kolhapur, Sri Pankaj Deshpande, sir. Thank you. Over to Asmita ma'am, Dr. Asmita.
Thank you, sir. Now I request our first resource person, Shri Pankaj Deshpande, sir, to address the audience on the topic Role of Policies and Legislation on Migrant Women Workers. Sir, please. Deshpande, sir, you have to unmute yourself and then you can start.
Yes.
Yes,
Am I
sir.
audible, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Yes.
Respected dignitaries, Honorable Rajnitai Vishwanath Magdum, President Council of Education, Kolhapur, Honorable Dr. Vishwanath Magdum, Member Council of Education, Senior Advocate and Secretary, Council of Education, Advocate V.N. Patil, Professor R. Narayan, Professor Dr. Ishwara Bhatt, the Vice Chancellor of Karnataka State Law University, Advocate Dr. Santosh Shah, Senior Advocate and Honorary Professor of Law, Dr. B.S. Patil, Associate Professor, Shri Prasad Kamath, Advocate Vaibhav Pednekar, Dr. M.C. Sheikh, Patil ma'am, Patil sir. Special thanks to Shahaji Law College and the faculty members for having me in this webinar. First, at the outset, let me be really humble in making a statement that I am not the authority on labor laws, especially on migrant laws. But since being a student of law and being a sensitive human being, we all are expected to know everything about these burning issues of workers, especially women workers, and additionally the migrant women workers. To begin with my session, I have some questions to raise. My first fundamental question would be whether women are weak. Do we presume them as weak, fragile, helpless, or without rights? And therefore we must ensure enactment and protection of their rights? Or does it mean that women have rights, but we don't have sufficient enforcement agencies? We need to answer this question in a proper way. We have traditional biases, we have traditional prejudices. In order to understand the issues of migrant women workers, we have to understand the history behind it. We can't have the charity-based approach. We must have a right-based approach. Although the Constitution of India in Article 15 Clause 3 provides for special protection of women, but at the same time that approach should not be charity-based approach. It should be right-based approach. When we examine the existing international labor law organizations conventions vis-a-vis Indian laws and the condition of migrant women workers, what I notice and what I experience day in and day out as while working as a secretary of District Legal Services Authority, that the women class has been neglected, women workers have been neglected. So there is need of change of attitude. Now, we have to understand who is a migrant labor. A person who either migrates within their home country or outside to pursue for work. If there is intrastate or interstate or interdistrict or intra-district migration of a working class, of a working laborers, we call them migrant workers. Now, this issue is not limited to particular region or a state. It has international ramifications. And now, if we understand globally, there have been several countries following different approaches. My concern, my focus would be on the drafting of policies and the legislations vis-a-vis migrant laborers. Now, the migrant women, especially as far as Indian context is concerned, if we understand it in the right way, we know that there is substantial flow of people from Bangladesh, from Nepal over recent decades. They come over here for searching better work, and oftenly these workers are subjected to harassment. They are subjected to violence, discrimination. Sometimes this discrimination is ethnic discrimination. It is religious discrimination. Sometimes it is regional discrimination. Sometimes it is linguistic discrimination. When anybody migrates from any other state, sometimes there is a regional discrimination. Sometimes there is linguistic discrimination. So these discriminations are required to be kept in mind while framing or while drafting or designing any national level policy or a legislation. This discrimination is required to be removed. It can be removed by number of things, by number of mechanisms. Secondly, the working system in India, especially the migration is concerned. In India, we notice that we have a seasonal businesses, especially in agriculture or other industries, and these migrant workers go through this seasonal working. So the seasonal farming or the seasonal working or seasonal industries, we have the contract system, but those contracts are totally informal in nature. These contracts have no legal sanctity since they are very informal in nature. And the contractor or the mukaddam or the employer at times exploit these working women, not only front of the finance, but the working hours and other essential things. While drafting any policy or any legislation, one has to clearly understand that the women are always underestimated when it comes to work. They are not given equal wages as compared to their counterparts, that is male workers. The wage issue is there, health issue is there, working time is there, maternity aspects are there, their living conditions are also there. When we come across the working time, there is no institutional framework. Since the contracts are informal in nature, we know that the common traits of work include average time of 70 to 80 hours a week. Now, if a worker, if a woman worker especially is made to work for 70 to 80 hours a week, it is definitely going to affect on her health, her state of mind, her kids, her family, and everything related to her. So there is no such regulation limiting or fixing the working time of the migrant women. The reason being that since they are seasonal, they are working in a seasonal industries, so they are under pressure of their employer to conclude and complete the task within 2 months or 3 months, because for another 9 months or 10 months or so they may be left with no work. So there is no social security. So in the backdrop of these things, they are forced to work for 80 hours, sometimes 90 hours, sometimes 100 hours by their employer, and sometimes they themselves are forced. They themselves force them to work for more than 100 hours, because they know, they are not sure that they might get some more work after the seasonal farming or seasonal industries. Now there comes the role of policy and there comes the role of legislation. The legislations and the policy makers, the legislatures and the policy makers will have to keep in mind the diverse condition of India, different traits and practices followed in India. We can't have a straitjacket formula for all the trades and businesses. What are the practices being followed? What are the business practices are there in every region? We need to study and examine the issues cropping out of it. Not only the working conditions. When we travel, we see that they live in huts, hutment during this shivering cold, especially in the winter season. They don't have sufficient places to stay. They don't have clean water. They don't have hygiene. They don't have these washrooms. The basic amenities are not being provided to them. So the living conditions of those workers is very pathetic, is very precarious. So that is going to affect on their health, that is going to affect on their state of mind and upbringing of their children, especially those who are below the age of 5 or 6 years. So the employers do not provide for the shelters. The workers themselves have to manage for the shelters and everything. The another aspect is of health. If there is overworking, it is going to affect on health. There are no insurance schemes for them from the employers or from the government, especially the migrant workers. The untreated illnesses trouble them. Sometimes those untreated illnesses causes fatalities. There have been several instances, especially in Maharashtra or Eastern Vidarbha. There have been instances of pregnancy of minor girl, 17-year, 16-year migrant women are pregnant. They were subjected to harassment by their employers only, or by the people connected to the employers only, and they had no voice. So we can't be neglecting or ignoring these issues of the migrant workers. they hardly know about their hygiene rights. They are not made aware of their hygiene rights. And the migrant workers or the migrant women workers especially, as rightly pointed out by Professor Ishwara Bhatt, we can't treat any migrant worker as a slave. But over the period of time, it is noticed that these migrant workers, especially migrant women, are not treated as a human beings or as a worker or as a laborer. They are being treated as slaves, and the practices of slaveries are being followed. So the policymakers and the legislatures have to keep in mind that the social securities are required, the economic securities are required, the different insurance schemes are required to be introduced. In Indonesia, there are insurance schemes for the migrant laborers, because one may not know that that they may get any work or not. So the migrant workers needs to be assured that they are being properly treated, respected as human beings. They are given sufficient rights, and whatever rights they have, there is an enforcement agency. There are issues of illness, there are issues of health. So they need to be literated, they need to be organized. This sector has been informal from years together, and unorganized one. This informal and unorganized sector of labor class is required to be treated specially. You can't have a common law for all kind of laborers. When I was going through different legislations regarding these labors, I recently come across that the government of India has replaced earlier 13 labor laws and introduced the Occupation of Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020. Now, from the very title of this enactment or code, one can easily say that the government might have taken sufficient steps and introduced safety, health and other working measures for the workers. But when I went through the provisions of this code, I could only find that there are stray references of migrant workers or migrant laborers. But I did not notice, Mr. Shah is there who is going to comment on these laws. I am not going to encroach upon his subject, but I would like to make one or two comments of mine about the code, that I could not notice a word that is migrant women workers, as rightly being experienced and noted by Professor Ishwara Bhatt, that the large chunk of these migrant workers is women. So when we have a number of women migrant workers, can't we have a special enactment covering the valuable and important rights of migrant women workers? We have Article 15 in Indian Constitution. If such legislation is introduced, or if such policy is formulated, there is a sufficient constitutional protection with the help of Article 15. The Constitution of India, especially if one goes through to Article 43, the duty is cast upon every state to secure a suitable legislation. So there should be a suitable legislation. So now one cannot argue and submit that we have a legislation and we have been taking care of the laborers. My point in this webinar would be the issues of migrant workers, especially migrant women workers, has not been addressed effectively in either of the legislations or different policies of the government of India. The Vice Chancellor Professor Bhatt was absolutely right in making a statement that we had this Interstate Migrant Women Act 1979. We had this legislation, but this legislation had limited application, limited applicability. It was only applicable to the interstate migrant women. It was not applicable to intrastate migrant women or migrant workers. So now if we completely ignore this migrant working women while framing any policy or legislation, so then there will be more and more problems. We can't continue to treat male workers and female workers in the same parameter. Article 43 cast an obligation on every state to bring the suitable legislation. Now the legislation is required to be suitable. As I was pointing out, that there can be, or my proposition would be, there should be a suitable legislation for the migrant women workers who are working in agricultural, industrial, or any other work, in order to ensure a decent standard of life, their living wages, and full enjoyment of leisure and social opportunities. Now, Article 43 is there, Article 15 is there, different constitutional protections are already available there. The migrant women workers could very well be protected with the help of these articles. Their legislation could be very well protected, but the issues are not being taken care of. During the recent pandemic, we have noticed that the migrant workers had to literally walk for 1,000 kilometers from their working place to their origin. So the knee-jerk reactions from different authorities during the pandemic caused thousands of fatalities. There have been unreported instances. There have been unreported instances of deaths of thousands migrant women. Some of them were pregnant when they were not being provided with medical aid. So during the pandemic, their condition was absolutely precarious. They were left with nothing. So there was no social security, there was no social equity for them. So in this backdrop of pandemic, what I propose or what I suggest is, can we have short-term policies and long-term policies? Because every now and then we can't go and we can't say that it was a pandemic, or there was a natural disaster, or there was a man-made disaster, or this incident has happened. It is going to be there. Climate change is there. There are several calamities are going to be there. Several disasters are going to happen. But are we going to leave these working women or working class neglected all the time by giving the name of pandemic, or by giving the name of by giving the reason of any other disaster? Every country is going to face the evils of disasters, but in absence of any national level policy, sometimes short-term policy or sometimes long-term policy, by keeping in mind the disaster, one has to have a proper policy in place to overcome these issues. There is no institutionalization of several measures. In Orissa, attempt was made regarding this to institutionalize the aspects, but in Maharashtra we could not find any such institutionalization of several things. We don't have the data, we don't have statistics as to how many migrant workers are there, how many migrant workers were working in Maharashtra, how many of them left Maharashtra, how many of them came back to Maharashtra, what are their living conditions, what are their health conditions, what are their kids doing, what about their education. We hardly have any data. In absence of any such data, statistics, it is really difficult and challenging for any institution in a democratic setup to draft a policy or prepare a legislation. So the pandemic has exposed all of us. It has exposed every institution of government. We could see that there was a hue and cry at every railway station or every bus stand by the migrant workers, especially women. They had no food, they had no water. So unless we have proper checks and balances in place in the form of maintenance of data, maintenance of statistics, their entry, their exit mechanism, and continuously monitoring their living conditions, we are not going to improve their standard of life. The wonderful promises made in Constitution of India in the form of preamble, that is social justice, economic justice, and political justice, are not going to be realized unless and until we have proper policies and legislation in place. So the draftsmen of different policymakers and legislations have to keep in mind the promises given in the preamble of Constitution of India. Different conventions are there, different guidelines are there from International Labour Organization and United Nations Organization. But unfortunately, some of the conventions have not been signed by India. India is not signatory to some of the conventions. This is really an unfortunate thing. But the state still can rectify and can bring the changes, because in India we have thousands and lakhs of unskilled workers and laborers. Their role and their significance and their importance in economic development of a country is taken for granted. They have very significant role. We always forget that whatever luxury, whatever comforts of our life we have been enjoying, isn't it because the workers, whatever luxuries, whatever comforts that at present we are enjoying, it is just because there are workers. So they may be in the form of migrant workers. The migrant workers need not be working in the industries only. They might be working in agriculture or other industry, or sometimes they are working as a housemaid. Sometimes they are nurses. Sometimes they are assistant in offices. Sometimes they are playing different roles. So these different nature of work of migrant women is required to be considered, and it is required to be taken into account while framing the different policies. While working as a metropolitan magistrate in Mumbai, I used to see that thousands of North Indians, especially from Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and other northeast states, thousands of women workers were working as a maid, as a cook, as a house help, as a laundryman, or some other works. So their living condition was precarious. They had no places to stay. They had no access to the different spheres of life. and they were simply living the life which they are destined up. So each sector, each issue is required to be critically examined, carefully examined by the legislature and the policymakers. One has to survey every area. In Maharashtra, especially in the Kolhapur district, if we visit Ichalkaranji, we'll come across there are workers from Rajasthan. So there are issues of this regionalism and this linguistic discrimination and so on and so forth. So one has to have a comprehensive approach. One cannot have a traditional or conventional approach. We need to introduce some unconventional approaches while dealing with the issues of migrant workers, especially migrant women workers. Now coming to the another aspect of this migrant women, the remuneration part is always ignored. As I was at the cost of repetition, I again say that the women are always underestimated as far as their wages are concerned. Their skills are underestimated. They are not given equal wages. I propose, and in fact, I would argue for giving more wages to women than the male workers, because their skills, their stamina, their physique may appear to be weaker, but their productivity is more than the male workers, especially the migrant work. And the remuneration part is required to be understood and carefully examined by the policymakers and the legislation. There is need of short-term policies and there is need of long-term policies, by keeping in mind different pandemics and different disaster schemes and all that, because we are going to suffer some more disasters, and those policies are required. Furthermore, the domestic workers many a times lack the contracts, social contracts. When we have services of domestic workers at our place, at our home, at our offices, these domestic workers, their living conditions, their working hours, their wages, their conditions of services are hardly codified, one hardly put in place, put in writing. So can we have a suitable legislation, or can we have a suitable drafting policy that the domestic workers are required to be brought within the umbrella of these migrant women? Because many a times it is noticed that if there is no work in farming or industries which are based on seasons, so at times they may have they may opt for working at different home as a domestic help. Sometimes they help and sometimes they work as a domestic maid. So there is no social contracts from our side, from the employer side, and therefore there is a possibility of exploitation from all fronts. So the remuneration part, the living conditions, the working time, the conditions of service, the health sector, the insurance schemes, and the seasonal functioning of several industries. These are some of the issues that are to be kept in mind while drafting the policies, while drafting any legislation. And I was on the point that we can have a separate legislation for migrant women workers, or we may have a special chapter in a legislation called a special law governing the rights of migrant workers, where the several issues regarding the migrant women, migrant workers can be dealt with effectively. Now coming to the enforcement of different policies and legislations. Now, simply having a good policy or simply having a good legislation is not going to serve the purpose. We need to have in place the proper enforcement agencies. We may be having labor commissioners or industrial officers or labor authorities or industrial authorities. But is there any audit of functioning of these authorities? Is it being properly, is it resulting in a good examination of functioning of authorities? These issues are also required to be taken in account, because we can't have a conventional approach. So right from 1950, we have a mechanism called enact a law, have authorities to enforce these provisions, and let the authorities deal with these issues. But there is no auditing of the functioning of different authorities. So auditing is required, periodical auditing is required, and if required, the amendments could be introduced in those in functioning and in the functioning of these authorities. So the authorities are required to be sensitized regarding dealing with the issues of migrant women workers. These authorities are required to protect the interest of migrant women workers, especially migrant workers, and they are required to keep proper checks over the employers or the contractors who employ the migrant workers, because migrant workers are going to be there for 2-3 months, or sometimes 1 month, sometimes 4 months. So one has to have the proper maintenance of their record, proper maintenance of their living conditions and everything. And these authorities, the local authorities, the help of the local authorities can be very well taken. Because if we ignore them, if we start ignoring their rights, if we start ignoring their issues, they might feel neglected, and that might give rise to some other problems. Because the migration is not going to be stopped, it is going to be there, and one has to clearly understand that migration and migration of workers is need of the hour. So we cannot stop migration. One has no right to stop the migration. There cannot be the knee-jerk reaction of thinking like stop the migration, provide the needs, because a person working in Maharashtra may not be that skilled as compared to the North Indian, or sometimes North Indian worker may not be that skilled as compared to the South India. So the skills are there, the technological know-how is there, the other working skills which may not be possessed by the particular regional worker may be possessed by another worker. So these intra-state and interstate exchange of labors or migration of labors is need of the hour, and this is going to be there, this is going to stay there. And thus to conclude my views and my comments on this migrant women worker, I would like to re-emphasize that we cannot have charity-based approach. We need to have a right-based approach. We need to change our mindset. The policymakers and the legislatures have to change the approach. And the assumption in our mind that women are fragile, the women are helpless, and women are weak is required to be removed. And last but not the least, I have one statement to make, that it is really difficult to change the mindset of common man, but it is not difficult to change the mindset of the lawmakers. So one has to bring good changes, and with this I thank the organizers for having me in this webinar. I especially thanks to Mr. Sheikh who gave my wonderful introduction. I don't think that I deserve the same introduction, but I'm really thankful. I'm looking forward to further interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your the wonderful session. Honorable Pankaj Deshpande sir has been enlightened on the issues relating to the discrimination on the ground of race, caste, linguistic of migrant working women. At the same time, he has been the assured, he has been the enlightened on the issues relating to the preparing or making laws. Such discrimination should not be taken into consideration at the time of drafting. Seasonal businesses and working, these contracts are not been formal in nature. Question of social security also he has been raised in his the wonderful session. Basic amenities of migrant workers are very pathetic. Employer do not provide the proper shelter, which is the basic fundamental right of every citizen. There is no uniform law for these workers. And again, he has been the wonderfully presented that during pandemic, the condition of working women was too worst. He has also suggested that can be have the short-term and the long-term policies irrespective of the natural calamities or the artificial one. Pandemic situation exposed to everyone relating to working migrant women's one. Comfort and luxurious life is also the right of such working women as we have availed the every common citizen as such one. His hope and his ray of hope has been also enlightened in such a fashion that good legislation would not serve the purpose only. Enforcement agency must be effective across to come for some sincere and auditing is the compulsory for the sake of overcome such kind of the issues one. And lastly, he has been very nicely represented that sensitization towards these migrant women is a need of our. He has been has particularly mentioned that this sensitization towards these migrant women is a need of our. On behalf of the Council of Education, Kolhapur, Shahaji Law College, Kolhapur, I really extend my profound gratitude for you, sir. You have been spent the valuable time for we people to enlighten our the delegates. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now we shall have our second session. So I request Dr. S.R. Rasam Madam to introduce our second resource person, Advocate Dr. Santosh Shah, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Asmita. Good morning to everyone. It's my proud privilege to introduce today's speaker for this session. He is nothing but my research guide, our beloved Advocate Dr. Santosh Arvind Shah. I'm sure everyone knows sir, but still I'm bound to introduce sir formally. His biodata runs into as long as 5 pages, but I am curtailing it in brief. Sir has completed PhD in law under the guidance of Dr. Satyaranjan Sate from Pune. Dr. Santosha has completed LLM from Temple University, USA, and MS in Political Science from Fort Hays State University, USA. His academic achievements are stood first at LLB final exam, by virtue of which he received number of prizes, awards, and honors, inclusive of a gold medal. He was included in the Dean's list of students at Temple Law School, USA. He was selected for All-American Scholar Who's Who Directory and Who's Who among international students in United States. He is a recipient of Stauffer International Student Scholarship and Scholarship for High Achieving Students in Career Transition, Fort Hays State University, USA. He is also a recipient of Certificate of Merit as an Outstanding Law Teacher from the Institute of International Commercial Law, Pace University School of Law, USA. He is legal advisor and practicing lawyer since June 1991. He is honorary professor in law at various institutions in India since 1991. He is a research guide and examiner of PhD students in law. He has organized, participated, presented papers, and acted as resource person in many national and international conferences, seminars, and workshops on law-related topics. He has also published many articles in English and Marathi in various journals and newspapers. On behalf of Council of Education's Shahaji Law College, I welcome you, sir.
Yes, madam. Now I request Dr. Santosh Shah sir to address the audience on the topic implementation of labor laws to migrant women workers in India. Sir, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Am I audible? Can everybody see me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, great. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Savita Rasam, for such a good introduction of mine. Dr. Narayanan, the principal of this college, the person who has taken a lot of efforts to organize this seminar, Professor Praveen Patil, Professor Sheikh, other members of the faculty, and my dear friends. Okay, the topic which is given to me or which is chosen by me is implementation of labor laws to migrant women workers in India. Now, I was told to share some PPTs, and therefore I will start showing my PPTs, and alongside I will give my talk so that you understand what I intend to do. Start from here. Yeah. See, spread of COVID-19 and lockdown highlighted an urgent need for legislative protection to migrant workers. Everybody will remember pictures in the media, pictures in the newspaper, where we saw thousands and thousands of migrant workers, men, women, children, walking barefooted all over the country during lockdown, migrating from the place of their work to the places from where they came. Now, this was a very, I would say, inhumanitarian sight to see, and that highlighted that perhaps in this country we don't have a proper legislative, executive, or even judicial protection to migrant workers, and therefore there is that need to think about the whole topic. So I welcome the organizers for taking up this topic in this right time. Now, as we all saw, migrant workers could not stay back in cities without employment. There was no social security net provided to them. State governments had no details of them. There is always a problem of any reliable data on the basis of which one can take decisions relating to migrant workers. They are perhaps the most ignored part of the human rights commitment to any nation state. So that is where the problem comes. Now, if we see the reasons why migration takes place, various reasons can be definitely thought about. Domestic work, we all know that for domestic work, a lot of people are get migrated from place to place, particularly from small places to big cities where people need such domestic work, domestic help. Agriculture, hunting, forestry, fishing, construction industry is one of the major industry where there are a lot of migrant workers. Mining, manufacturing, electricity, trade, hotels, restaurants, and other services is generally what we see where migrant workers are. Now, what are the reasons for migration? Why people migrate? Well, actually, if we take a pause here, you will see that migration can be of two types. There is migration, and normally migration takes place in search of better life, in search of betterment. To give you a modern example of migration, a lot of people who are educated in India go for their postgraduate education in, let's say, US. They settle down there, and they are also migrants. They are also immigrants. But their migration is for betterment in a very positive sense. Okay, it is not that if they stay in this country, they will not do well. but they are going abroad in search of a better life. Now, and you will always find that people who migrate, okay, always are very committed to work because they don't have that security. They're very honest to work. They do well, and you see Indian community in US, it's doing so well, and is in fact in a way has a great impact on the US economy. But the kind of migration we are talking here has a negative connotation. Migration which takes place in this country of the type we are talking of is due to poverty, because they're so poor they can't sustain themselves at the places they are, so they are made to migrate. They are debt-ridden many times, financial problems. There is lack of local employment. There is no employment available, or loss of local employment. Sometimes they lose their employment. They are not that skilled. They're not there in demand at the place where they are. And that's why they are forced to migrate. Now, some examples, you see migration for sugar cutting in Maharashtra and Gujarat, migration for BT cotton seeds in Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Uttar Pradesh. Now, northern states, particularly Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, contribute major chunk of migrant workers. You see in many industries, like, for example, construction, mining, restaurants, hotels, you will find a lot of North Indians who have migrated in Bombay, in Mumbai, in different parts of Maharashtra, and are trying to get their jobs and living here. Now, coming to now the legal part of this. See, when you talk of migrant workers and migrant women workers, we have to keep in mind, first of all, our international obligation. India is a signatory, India is a part of International Labour Organization, and therefore, to that extent, whatever international labor treaties, conventions, we are part of, we are expected to implement them in our municipal law. Okay, so it starts as an international obligation. Then coming to Indian Constitution, I would point out certain articles of directive principles of state policy. Article 39 says certain principles of policy to be followed by the state. The state shall in particular direct its policy towards securing, one, or A, that the citizens, men and women, equally have the right to an adequate means to livelihood. So every man and woman in this country is supposed to have an adequate means to livelihood. Okay, of course, this is a directive principle, is the goal. It is not justiciable, as we all know. You can't go to the court for enforcement of it, but that is a goal towards which every state must march. And therefore, citizens, men and women, have equally the right to an adequate means to livelihood. Then, Article 39D says that there is equal pay for equal work. There should be equal pay for equal work for both men and women. Now, here we know universally, more in India, more amongst migrant workers, you will always find that there is disparity between what a man gets and what a woman gets. What woman gets is most of the times less than what a man is paid. 39E says that the health and strength of the workers, men and women, and the tender age of children are not abused, and that citizens are not forced by economic necessity to enter into avocations unsuited to their age of strength. So child labor, women, when they are made to work, should not be made to do something which their strength will not enable them to do it. So your age, your strength should never be abused, is what directive principles of state policy says. But many a times we see that this rule is flouted in practice, and many a times children, child labor, women beyond their capacity are made to work in many industries. Article 41 says right to work, to education, and to public assistance in certain cases. The state shall, within the limits of its economic capacity and development, make effective provision for securing the right to work, to education, to public assistance in cases of unemployment, old age, sickness and disablement, and in other cases of undeserved want. So you see, right to work, education, and public assistance, which is there to every citizen of this country, including the migrant workers and women. Article 42 says provision for just and human conditions of work and maternity leave. The state shall make provision for securing just and human conditions of work and for maternity leave. So your conditions of work where these people are working must be human. They must be just. You must give them maternity leave. Article 43 says living wage. The state shall endeavor to secure by suitable legislation or economic organization or in any other way to all workers, agricultural, labor, industrial, or otherwise, work a living wage, conditions of work, ensuring a decent standard of life, and full enjoyment of leisure and social and cultural opportunities. And in particular, the state shall endeavor to promote cotton industries on an individual or cooperative basis in rural areas. So they should also be able to enjoy a decent living, a comfortable living. Of course, that is a far away dream for these people, is what we see in practice. Now, after seeing the international and constitutional position, let us actually see what are the laws in India, what are the labor laws in India which would apply to migrant workers and migrant women workers. For this purpose, the first law which would apply is, let me take a pause. Are Purus, it's a battery level. Your battery is running low. Okay. Charge kar. Sorry for that interruption. Yeah. The first law which comes here, which is the most important law as far as migrant workers and women are concerned, is called Interstate Migrant Workmen Registration Act 1979. Now you will see that the very purpose of this act is mainly to see to it that they come under some sort of registration. People who employ migrant workers, people who are employed as migrant workers are brought under some act where you have an available data of them as registered workers. So salient features of this act, because if you don't have proper data, if you don't have proper registration, then the laws which are to be made applicable, the benefits which are to be given to them may not reach to the proper persons. So first, this act is applicable to every establishment or contractor who employs 5 or more interstate migrant workmen. I'm told my PPT is not visible. Is my PPT visible now?
No, sir.
Oh.
Yeah, sir. Now it's come.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah, it's visible now, sir.
Can you see now?
Yeah, sir. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Oh, so someone should have stopped me before. Anyway. Yeah, I'll just run the PPT again shortly so that what is not seen can be seen now. Can the PPT be seen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So first PPT is about how COVID-19 and lockdown highlighted this situation of migrant workers. Okay. Then categories of migrant women workers, the reasons. We saw domestic work, agriculture, construction, mining, manufacturing, electricity, trade, hotels, restaurant, and other services. Reasons for migration, we saw poverty, debt, lack of local employment, loss of local employment. Some examples in Maharashtra, Gujarat, we saw a lot of North Indians coming here is what we saw. Then International Labour Organization, India's international responsibility, India's constitutional responsibility, directive principles of state policy. And thereafter, I entered into one main legislation which deals with migrant workers. And that legislation is Interstate Migrant Workmen Registration Act 1979. Salient features of this legislation. 1, this act is applicable to every establishment or contractor who employs, it has to be employs 5 or more interstate migrant workmen. So whoever employs more than 5 workers must register in accordance with this act, must fulfill the requirements of this act. What is the requirement? Number 2, requirement of registration by such establishment and license by contractor with registering officer appointed under state or central government. So every such establishment or a contractor must register or have a license, one who is employing migrant workers beyond number 5. Number 3, then there is requirement to furnish particulars regarding the workman in the form prescribed by the government. Then to issue to the workman a passbook, okay, containing the details of employment. Okay. So you see, the idea is to see to it that first you register, then you give all the details, then you issue to the workman a passbook containing all the details of employment. Then there are guidelines regarding wages payable, minimum wages, displacement allowance, journey allowance. Then there are provisions relating to suitable residential accommodation, adequate medical facility, protection of clothing, suitable conditions of work for these workmen, appointment of inspectors for implementation of that. It also gives a right to raise industrial dispute. And finally, that gives deterrent punishment for contravention of that. Now, the provisions of this act, if you see, are really worth considering, worth implementing. Unfortunately, this act is not implemented in practice. In fact, Section 21 of this act says that these legislations are also applicable to migrant workmen. They are Workmen's Compensation Act, Payment of Wages Act, Industrial Disputes Act, which is the main industrial legislation, Employees State Insurance Act, Employees Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, and the Maternity Benefit Act. So all these acts are also made applicable by this act to the migrant workers. But the requirements of this act are onerous. Okay, that makes cost of hiring higher. There is no scheme of the government, proper scheme of the government which protects migrant workers, and therefore, from both the sides, from the side of size of establishments, from the side of contractors, and also from the side of government, there is apathy in implementation of the act. Officers are not appointed. Act is not implemented in practice. Anyway, when I come to implementation, I'll elaborate more on this. Let us see what is the other legislation. There is, even Sexual Harassment of Workmen at Workplaces Act 2013, which we all know, which can be made applicable. Importantly, there is the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2019, which was referred to the Standing Committee by the Parliament, and that kind of aims at codifying all these laws. And there is a chapter, separate chapter on migrant workers in this particular code, but that has not yet been enacted. Maybe we'll see that coming very soon. Then there is one more legislation which will apply to migrant workers, that is Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008, which says that the central government will formulate schemes for unorganized workers on matters relating to 1, life and disability, 2, health and maternity, 3, old age, 4, any other, and necessity for unorganized workers to get themselves registered. So it says that the central government is to formulate schemes for these workers relating to life and disability, health and maternity, old age, and any other. And it emphasizes the necessity for unorganized workers to get themselves registered. Majority of migrant workers cannot avail the benefit of this legislation since they migrate from one state to another. Okay. The same problem of data, same problem of implementation applies here also, and therefore there is no social security to these workers. Then there is another legislation which is applicable to migrant workers as well, which is Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act 1970. What is the aim of this act? Regulation of contractors providing workers to industrial sectors, registration by contractor and principal employer. Okay, both, because contractors is like outsourcing. Industries outsource the work to contractors. Contractors get these migrant workers and send them to industries. Therefore, registration of industries, registration of contractor is a must. but many a times it doesn't happen. And this act is also not satisfactory implemented. Now, there is a huge, a lot of workers are in, and a lot of women are in construction workers. There is an act called Construction Workers Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1996. But only 3.48 crores are registered in the fund. There is a fund also. Now, migrant workers belong to both organized and unorganized sectors. About 65 million interstate migrant and 33% of these migrants are workers. 65 total, 33 are workers. Let me take the audience through some judgments of the Supreme Court on this point. We all know that because of COVID-19 and lockdown, the Supreme Court took cognizance of these migrant workers in Writ Petition 10801 of 2020, Harsh Bandar versus Union of India. Supreme Court directed the government to ensure minimum wages for all migrant workers, to prepare national disaster management plan. The Supreme Court came down very heavily on the government, seeing the plight of these workers, the way they had to leave their places and walk to their home towns without any security, and directions were given. Even Union Home Ministry directed the employers to pay wages to their workers without deduction, landlords to refrain from collecting rents. Of course, how far all of this implemented is questionable and debatable. Then in case of Alok Srivastav versus Union of India, okay, which is a 2020 SCC online, Supreme Court 345, Supreme Court ordered to ensure accessibility of basic necessities and medical facilities for migrant workers. So again, in this judgment, accessibility of basic necessities and medical facilities were ordered. However, migrant workers were left destitute with no option but to leave their hometown on foot. Then there is also a 2018 Supreme Court judgment which reprimands state government, central government, and union territory for their ignorance and plight of apathy over construction workers. So it really related to construction workers, and central government and union territory and the state governments were reprimanded by the Supreme Court for not taking any steps to improve the conditions of life of these workers. The Supreme Court issued various directions for implementation of Interstate Migrant Workmen Registration Act 1979 in this 2018 judgment. Now, what are the problems of implementation? Problems of implementation are lack of awareness. Many of these legislations are not known by, forget about workmen, migrant women. They are not known by the establishments, industries, employers. There is no awareness which is there about these legislations. Secondly, legislation is limited. There is no one code which applies to them. There is need to have one code specifically devoted to these migrant workers. And anyway, the legislation which is there does not provide all the relief. And of course, as we say in this country, we are very good at passing laws, very bad at implementing them. And this is one of the best examples as to how human rights of these workers are not at all implemented through the legislations that we have. I will just, I think, before I sum up, I would like to quote from Human Rights book of Krishna Iyer. I will just get a quote. It's a dialogue between Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore. I think I will just mention that, and then I think I'll stop this. We'll just take a I will just read from, this is a book which I recommend anybody who is sensitive to human rights, who wants to take up human rights jurisprudence, must have this book. This is Dialectics and Dynamics of Human Rights in India, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, by a great scholarly judge which Supreme Court ever had, V.R. Krishna Iyer. In his book, he says, I mean, he has quoted the conversation between Rabindranath Tagore and Gandhiji, and I think that applies in all force to this topic. Once Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore asked Gandhiji, Gandhiji, are you so unromantic when in the early dawn the morning sun rises? Does it not fill your heart with joy to see its reddish glow? When the birds sing, does not your heart thrill with its divine music? When the rose opens its petals and blooms in the garden, does its sighs not bring cheer to your heart? So Rabindranath Tagore is asking Gandhiji, Gandhiji, why can't you see the beauty of the nature, the joy which the nature gives, the birds, the morning sun, the roses, etc.? Why doesn't that cheer your heart? Okay, that's what Rabindranath Tagore is asking Gandhiji. And this is what the Mahatma replies. Gurudev, I am not so dumb or insensitive as not to be moved by the beauty of the rose or the morning rays of the sun or the divine music of the birds. But what can I do? My one desire, my one anxiety, my one ambition is, when shall I see the red tint of the rose on the cheeks of hungry, naked millions of my people? When shall I hear the sweet and melodious song of the birds in place of their agonizing sighs? When will such music come out of their soul? And when will that day come when the light of the morning sun will illuminate the heart of the common man in India? When will I see its luster and brightness on his face? So see, Mahatma Gandhi says, I don't think I'm dumb. I understand this beauty. But I want this beauty to be seen, to be experienced, at least to some extent, by these small Indians, these Indians whose basic needs are not fulfilled. And when your basic needs are not fulfilled, how can you think of all these beautiful things? So I want them to experience at least some part of this beauty, and that will happen when we take care of their basic needs, their human rights. So all in all, in I would say that the problem here of migrant workers is a larger problem, is a larger problem of human rights, is a larger problem of our sensitivity to human rights. Of course, in a country like India, where we have a lot of socio-economic issues, we have a lot of different sectors, we have to fix our priorities, but there is need for legislature to think seriously, to have a separate code for these migrant workers. There is need for executives to see to it that these laws are implemented. Now, this is where we see that the majority of the problem comes, where though the laws are there, we saw the implementation is very bad. There is a lot of apathy in implementation. So executive needs to be energized. Executive needs to be sensitized about these issues. And of course, even judiciary, fortunately, because of COVID-19, the Supreme Court took cognizance of this, passed orders in its public interest litigation jurisdiction. But that is not sufficient. We need to have active judiciary to look into the problems of migrant workers, because that can happen not when in a PIL Supreme Court passes orders or in a PIL High Court passes orders. When day-to-day labor and industrial laws are implemented, day-to-day labor and industrial judiciary also sees to it that the benefits of labor and industrialization are given to these workers, then I think there will be effective implementation. So there is necessity of a combined effort coming from legislature, executive, which is very important, and also judiciary, to be sensitive to the needs of these workers, and more so to women, because if there is that much of a problem generally of migrant workers, the problem would be greater, as we can imagine, of women workers. Their special needs are never taken into consideration. So that greater need of women workers, special need of women workers in terms of wages, human conditions of work, the work which is commensurate to their strength and maternity reliefs, etc., they need to be taken into consideration and implemented. So I think we all have this problem. I'm glad that Professor Praveen Patil took lead in organizing a seminar of this type on a topic. These types of topics really make you sensitive towards people who are deprived of many things which we take for granted. So I hope this topic, this talk of mine, brings in the required sensitivity, not only towards migrant workers and women, but generally towards human rights of many deprived people. Finally, I will just point out what Winston Churchill had to say. He said, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Though I'm not standing up here and speaking, but I'm speaking. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. So I thank everybody who has sat down and listened to me for being patient with me. I have tried to express my thoughts. I have taken labor legislations which are applicable and problem of implementation. I hope my talk has contributed to the whole topic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now I request Dr. Asam Madam to give the vote of thanks for today's session. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the session. The session was very informative and it really fed the need of the topic. And due to the PPT presentation also, we could be able to see the different aspects of this topic. Now we shall have our third session. So I will hand over it to Suchita Madam.
Who's there for third session?
हो गया मेरा हो गया
Thank you, Asmita.
Yes, ma'am. You can just take over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome all of you to the third session on the one-day national seminar on migrant women workers and labor laws, identifying gaps and exploring the legal remedies. We shall now begin with the third session of our webinar. And the topic of this session is Migration, a Challenge to Women's Rights, Social Issues and Politico-Economic Redressal. The resource person for this session is Dr. B.S. Patil, sir. I now call upon Professor Suhas Patki to introduce the resource person for the third session. Patki, sir.
Good afternoon, all of you. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce today's guest for third session of the one-day national webinar on migrant women workers and labor laws, identifying gaps and exploring the legal remedies, organized by the Council of Education's Shahaji Law College, Kolhapur, in association with Women's. The full name of the guest is Dr. Babagoda S. Patil. Sir has completed BSc from Karnataka University, Dharwad, LLM from the Department of Law, Karnataka University, Dharwad. Sir has awarded doctorate by the Goa University for his thesis titled Human Rights of Disabled, a Critical Socio-Legal Study in Contemporary Goa. Dr. Patil sir is presently working as Associate Professor at VM Salgaonkar Law College, College of Law, Panjim, Goa. Sir has been part of this institution from last 2 decades. He is also faculty for the LLM program of Research Center of the college. Sir is the director of Moot Court Society of the college. Sir is also on the editorial board of the Salgaonkar Law Review. He is also member of the steering committee of the Child Rights Clinic of the college. Sir also has the credit of developing modules for the teaching skills of negotiations and mediation. He has also been invited to organize the national rounds of the Louis M. Brown Client Counseling Competition and to train the participants for the same. He has been the director of the Legal Aid Society. He has also been instrumental in organizing various human rights activities in the college, including seminars, certificate courses, national level moot court competition, ADR competitions, etc. Sir has been involved in the research projects on improving access to legal aid as a part of building integrated approach and access to justice study of the law school based on legal services clinics funded by the United Nations Development Program and the Government of India in the year 2011. He has also been part of the UGC initiative of e-Pathshala. He is a visiting faculty for the LLM program on human rights and ADR certificate program at Shahaji University, Kolhapur. He is a member of the international organizations like Global Alliance for Justice Education and also South Asian Forum of Clinical Law Teachers. Sir's area of research area of interest, alternative dispute resolution mechanism, clinical legal education. Sir's contribution in research is outstanding. Such a luminary is with us for the third session. I heartily welcomes you, sir, on behalf of Council of Education, Shahaji Law College, Kolhapur, and B.S. Patil, sir, to enlighten us migration, a challenge to women's rights, social issues, and politico-economic redressal. Over to you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Uh, uh, I think Suhas Patki has taken a lot of trouble in introducing me because he had to come out of the house and search for the connectivity. But you are successful, so you have introduced me and people could hear me. I am a professor in VM Salgaonkar College of Law, and I have known the earlier speaker, Dr. Santosha, and I love to see him again because his enthusiasm has not died down. Because when it comes to education, he is the man who we can rely upon. You can see that he ran from the place and bought a book and read it to us. So when it comes to knowledge, he knows no bounds. So he comes up with maximum information possible for us. Uh, and I thank Praveen Patil and Dr. Narayan for giving me this opportunity. Dr. Narayan has played an important role in my life as in a professional life because he was my external expert when I was awarded PhD long back. So we had maintained a relation after that, and now it's good to see you, and thank you very much for inviting me for this program. Uh, the topic that we have been speaking about since morning, from Honorable Vice Chancellor and then Honorable Judge and then our Doctor Advocate. So when we look at these all issues, it's a very pertinent issue to be tackled. But when you look into when we have a limited budget, when we have a limited purse and we start distributing, we ask the humans to stand in line, and the migrants don't figure in that line because they are the least bothered community. But they are the community which gives a maximum developmental provisions for the state. So when let me share the screen and then start with my presentation. So the discussion in today's presentation, it's going to be of different ideas I'm going to discuss. So there are total 11 ideas which I'm going to discuss, maybe 11 discussions. I cannot call them all of them as an idea, but there are going to be 11 discussions. And if I listen to the earlier speakers, they were so much worried about the rights of the migrants as a whole. But the Commission for Women, the of Central Union of India, they are looking into the rights of migrant women specifically. So when we are talking about problems of migrants, then the problems of the migrant woman are going to be double folded, because being a woman, she would be discriminated, and being a migrant, she would be further discriminated. So there would be double discrimination against her. Now if you look at the migration challenge to women rights, now the topic I'm taking up in today's discussion is social issues and political economic redressal. So I, being a law professor, I won't be discussing sections and acts. That would be quite, I don't think I have ever done that. But today, because of Dr. Praveen, he has offered me a topic where law won't be discussed. But what we are discussing is the social issues and how do we redress them through political and economic process. So that is where I'm going to take up the discussion. And as in the beginning of my discussion, I would be taking up concept of migration. A lot of time I'm going to spend on that, and then I'll move on to women and women rights, and I'll end my discussion with the recommendations. So those recommendations, if it could reach to the right people, then we can definitely see a different, a kind of an improvement in the position of migrant women. So let me start with the first discussion, that is a migration as a double-edged sword. See, now there are two states. Again, before I continue with discussion, let me make a submission to you that Dr. Shah and Honorable Judge looked at migration at national level, that is India, as one state. From one state, the people are moving to another state. So there are two states. One is a state of origin, the other one is the host state. So the reason for migration and other thing I'm going to take up for the discussion. But migration is not only a national issue, it's an international issue. There is a migration from one country to another country. So if you look at my place, I'm sitting in Goa. You know, Goa sees a migration. Goa is both origin state and host state. From Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Orissa, people come here to work. So the Goa becomes a host state. So the origin states are Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Orissa. I'm just giving you a few examples, but otherwise we find people from all over India, especially now as presently I do observe the migrations from Assam. Goa is also a host state, not only a host state, it's a state of origin, because Goans are migrating to Europe. There's a large migration process going on where Goans moving out of India and they are settling in Europe. And this is again not a circular migration where they come back, but it's a migration with uh, a passport, with a Portuguese passport. Now that is what we are observing. So Goa is a unique, we are in a unique situation where we are both host as well as origin, state of origin. And migration is a double-edged sword, because when I talk about this double-edged sword, I'm mixing up both national and international migrations. So that's why I had taken a small break before I continue. Now, when we say it's a double-edged sword, I'm talking of three perspectives, three ways if you look into migration. The first perspective is migration, it is an engine of growth. It brings development, because immigrants bring labor. The labor brings a skilled and unskilled labor, and the labor brings growth. Because economic growth and sustainable welfare state is possible only through the migration. That's one way of achieving it. Then the developed or developing countries, now say for example Bihar if you take developing state, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Orissa, they look at migration as a process of development of the state. Now, how, when a family migrates from Bihar to Goa or Bombay, how Bihar develops? By a process of remittance. Now, remittance is the money that is earned in Bombay is being sent to Bihar. And in Bihar, that money gets circulated in the Bihar market. So the Bihar market is getting surplus money. And how they are getting the surplus money? Through remittance. So a migrant worker is sending it to his family. So that is how the Bihar looks at migration as a process of development, because they are going to get more and more influx of money through, and then it leads to collection of more taxes, and the collection of more taxes will lead to more developmental activities. So therefore, it is a first perspective is it's an engine of growth, and it's a positive look at it. But if you look at the second perspective is from the origins, the state, host state. The state of origin looks at it as a development engine of growth. Now, second perspective is it's a threat. Migration as a threat. Now, threat to an identity. Now, that is very true, because once the migrant population settles down, the migrant population brings their own culture to this land. That's why Bombay has become cosmopolitan. It has become metropolitan, because multiple cultures live together. So that identity of Bombay has changed. It is no more Maratha capital or Maharashtra capital. It has become capital, economic capital of India. The cosmopolitan, who made it cosmopolitan is the migrants. Safety is another issue, because it is always felt that the migrants influx increases the crime rate. That's a direct proportionality. More migration, more crime. But my study and my observation is that migrants themselves are not criminals, because during the migration, some anti-social elements, they join and they come and they commit the crime, and the blame falls on the migrants. As far as my observation goes, migrants, they do commit crime, but it's amongst themselves. One migrant committing crime against another migrant. There are no instances where a migrant is having a problem with a local. That doesn't happen, and this is what I have been observing continuously. It's not that one sporadic incident, but it's a continuous process where migrant always have a problem or a criminal activity against another migrant, and never with the local. Social cohesion would be at stake. That's again a fear that has been expressed, because once a migration takes place, the society changes. The demography of the state changes. And when the demography changes, then it leads to a differential approach. When you look into Western countries, the Western countries, they look at migration as a threat to security. They look at the migrants as a pollutants of cultural and religious hegemony, because they have developed their own culture and they live by their culture, and the migrants are going to pollute that. And by migrants, flooding of migrants, the local labor market gets saturated. Now, once the labor market gets saturated, the wages fall, wages reduce. And that's the reason why most of the people are not in favor of migration. So that's why I said it's a double-edged weapon. It may help for development, it may also cause damage. The third perspective of migration is again concerning the origin state, where the loss which the origin state suffer would be loss of human labor, loss of skill, loss of social cohesion, because there is a splitting of a family. So if a husband migrates, wife and children remain in the state of origin, and the social cohesion will be an issue. A broken family, it leads to a broken family. Children are brought up by a single parent. That's again lopsided. I should say it is the sad part of migration process. But what they gain is financial gain, capital gain. That's what they achieve through this migration. So first thing we need to understand is that migration is a double-edged weapon. So when it's a double-edged weapon, first we need to have a policy decision that whether we should encourage migration or discourage migration. Whether you encourage or discourage, but once a person migrates, he doesn't cease to be a human being. He continues to be a human being. So there is a need for protection, especially if a migrant is a woman. So migration of female has more problems because in addition to these problems which I mentioned in first, second and third perspective, the female would face the sexual harassment, human trafficking, sex trade, exploitation, victimization at workplace. Now, these are the additional problems which women face because of the vulnerability. See, as a woman, she is vulnerable at a workplace. But as a migrant woman, her vulnerability multiplies. The man who is planning to exploit a woman would choose a migrant woman over a local woman because of lack of support. So therefore, a migrant woman is always under a kind of a threat. So she needs more protection under law. So let us move on to the next discussion. So why migrate? What are the kinds of migration that we can see? The first migration that we can see is a temporary migration. Now, the temporary migration is actually a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to a situation. Say, for example, somebody is in a deep debt. They have taken a loan. They could not repay the loan. The able-bodied member of the family, son, maybe a son-in-law or someone, they migrate to earn money and pay the debt, pay the loan. Now, this is a temporary migration because it's a migration only to tide over the financial constraint. But the other one is a permanent migration where a person goes and settles permanently and with no plans of coming back. But there's another migration which is very often we see in India, that is a circular migration. Professor Advocate Dr. Shah was mentioning about sugarcane cutting. The sugarcane cutting is a circular migration because they come, stay for 3 months, 4 months, go back. Next season again they come. Same thing happens in Goa. Once the tourist season begins, the people come, they work for that season, and then again they go back. And that's a circular migration. In addition to these three categories, we can also have a migration within the country that's called as internal migration. Then we have a regional migration like neighboring states. Bangladesh is entering India. That becomes a regional migration. Sri Lankans, the Tamil Sinhalese, they are entering into Tamil Nadu. That's a regional migration. Then there is an international migration where the Africans are going to Europe, they're migrating to Europe, and then migrating to Indians migrating to USA. This is an international migration. A Goan migrating to Europe is again an international migration. So once we have understood what are the types of migration that are possible, let us look into the reasons for migration. Now that's an interesting part here, that there are two factors which influence migration. One is a push factor, the other one is the pull factor. The push factor is a person is being pushed out of the state because of lack of opportunities. That's a push factor. Now I'm going to give you details about the reasons. You may classify them into a push factor or a pull factor. But wherever you see a pull factor, the pull factor is nothing but a development of a state. So wherever there is an uneven development in a state, in a country, migration takes place from an underdeveloped part of India to developed part of India. So that's why what you see is maximum migration from, that's what Professor was mentioning, that North India, UP, Bihar, people migrate out of it because that region is yet to be developed. They move to the areas which are developed, like Bombay, Maharashtra, Goa, Kerala. So that's the area where they see the opportunities. So push factor and pull factor there are two types. Now let us look into the reasons. First reason is migration is a risk management strategy. Now look at how a poor man look at migration. He looks at migration as an opportunity. He is not looking at it as a burden. He's looking at it as an opportunity, because when a family is at risk, maybe a financial risk, when a family is at risk, they exhaust all the available remedies. And if none of them are going to help them in achieve to overcome the risk, then the migration becomes the final strategy. So migration is used as a risk management strategy. And migration is done to achieve two important basic needs of a human being. One is security. Now, when I say security, security is the absence of threat. Now, they may be having some kind of a threat in their state of origin, but it's not only an absence of threat, security of food, water, shelter, income, healthcare. Now, when these things are assured, no people will move out of their own state. So when these are lacking, then they go in search of it. So one of the basic need which human beings wants to achieve is the main reason for migration. In addition to this, there's another very important reason, which is 89% of migration happens in case of women is because of this reason, that is proximity, that is marriage. Migration because of marriage. See, there are primary migration. A man goes to a new place, start working there, then comes back, marries and takes his wife. So the secondary migration. So woman always enters into the scene of migration as a secondary migrant. She's never a primary migrant. She's a secondary migrant. If a husband, a married man wants to relocate himself in a new place, first he will go explore and then bring his family. So that is proximity. Marriage or family reunification is the cause for the migration. So security and proximity is another important reason for migration. Gang violence is another reason for migration, but this gang violence is not to be considered as a reason in India, a dominant reason in India, but it's a very predominant reason in South America. So in South American situations, gang violence was a major cause for migration. If you look at the other migrations like risk, basic needs, these are all planned migration. But when it comes to climate change, military conflict, these again are the reasons why people move from the place because of lack of security and chances of loss of life. Population growth is another reason for migration. As population grows, the opportunities dries up. As the opportunities dries up, it becomes very difficult for a person to survive. So he migrates. But one of the most interesting and stunning reason for migration is cash crop dependence. So when a village, then followed by town, followed by district, then followed by state, depend on cash crop, migration becomes a necessity. I'll give you a simple reason for this. Sugarcane, the Kolhapur belt is known for a sugarcane, and sugarcane is a cash crop. Just 40 years back, sugarcane was not a major major crop in Kolhapur. And as the irrigation facilities increased, more and more land was brought under sugarcane growth. How a village, a family or a house in a village looked. A house in a village never had a money, but always they had grains in the house. Food was never a problem because they were growing it. They were having it. As the population moved towards cash crop, now the grains disappeared from the family, from the household, replaced by a cash. But the cash, we means the farmers, and I will include myself also as a farmer because I do the farming activity in Kolhapur. So as a farmer, we are not a good manager of money, but we are good managers of fields. So cash crop, when we have a cash in hand, we spend it. We don't invest it wisely. A cash in the hands of a businessman is an asset. A cash in the hands of a farmer is actually a spending. It's not even an asset. He will never invest it. He's going to spend it. So as he runs out of a cash, he needs immediate earning, and so he migrates. So as long as the crop was a food crop, the migration necessity was very less. As we moved on to cash crop, it has become more. And there's one more very important reason for migration, which I'm going to deal in the other slides also. But once you go back to food crop, doesn't mean that migration will stop, because there is a culture of migration that has been built. Social connectivity has been built. So one man goes to Pune, comes back, and looking at him, other 5 boys are ready to go because they find it to be very lucrative rather than staying and wasting life at the village. So that's why the people would tend to migrate. It becomes a chain reaction. So once a migration begins, it's very difficult to stop. Let us look at predicting migration. Can we see, predicting migration is very important because the state can come into action. Either they encourage, discourage, stop, protect, or the migrants. So if migration happens without knowledge, I'll give you an example of last year. Before last year, 2018, there was a train which came to Goa filled with 5,000 workers. It came from Bihar. And there was a video shot where the sea of people are walking, they're crossing the overbridge and getting into a railway station. And it was a video shot and it was put in the WhatsApp. The government was caught unaware. Immediately they sent the local Tahsildar and Mamledar to check where they have been settled, why they have come, what is the purpose, and go to see that they were all have been brought for construction work. Now see, if the government knew that by giving permission for so many construction projects, the demand for labor will increase, and the demand for increase in demand for labor would lead to influx of more migrants. So they would have been ready to deal with the migration. Now here is a state which comes to know about the migration as a last person. The people of Goa knew first, and then the state came to know. Now that's the sad part of the functioning of the state. So therefore, predicting migration becomes a very, very important tool for protecting the rights of migrant women and migrants in general. So it's very difficult. First of all, it's very difficult to predict because there are too many actors influence migration. So what influences migration, we never know. Now take the example of Karnataka. So in 2014, sorry, before that, the Karnataka government came up with PDS system. That is, they improved PDS system, public distribution system, where they started providing 30 kilos of grains every month. So 30 kilos of grain every month was more than enough for a family to survive. Migration dried up. People stopped coming to Goa. Kerala faced the shortage of the labor. Now see, one act of one state affects the other. So what was the reason which migrants dried up is the food security. Once the food security was provided in Karnataka, they stopped moving from out of the state. So therefore, what influences, you have to keep your eyes open and observe carefully, and you need to predict in advance. So then immediately the construction workers and others have to move out of Karnataka and find somewhere else, and that's the time when the Bihar and Uttar Pradesh found a foothold in Goa. Otherwise, it was always Karnataka laborers working in Goa. Then migration sometimes becomes very difficult to distinguish between migration and mobility. Now, take today's webinar. If it was not a webinar but a seminar, and because of the pandemic, we are sitting at our place and talking. But if it was not, I would have come to Kolhapur. But when I'm traveling to Kolhapur, I am a part of a mobility population, not migrant population, because I'm coming here for a few days. So you have to distinguish between mobility population from migrant population, and that distinction is very difficult to make. Some people come and stay for a month, but they still remain a mobility population and not a migrant populations. So a migrant population, a person is the one who contribute for the development of the state, and in turn he gains for his survival. Mobility population is something which is there to do a work for someone and move out of it, because he is not directly involved with the developmental activity of the state. Migration being politicized, many times we don't get a reality, a real picture. Because if a political party's ideology is against migrants, they give a picture that there is influx of migrants when there is no migration. So therefore, a politicized situation makes very difficult to see the reality. Then securitize, and security issue also makes it very difficult to understand the reality of migration, because they tend to overreact to every situation. Now here, these are the few human rights conventions that are being passed by United Nations. Sadly, there is no single instrument, single convention for migrant women. There are few for migrant workers, but for migrant women has been ignored. But there is and that's why I feel the step taken by Shahaji Law College as well as by the National Commission on Women is commendable, because they are in the forefront in the world, because they started thinking about the migrant woman plight. So if you look at my topic name, and if you look at these other two instruments, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural, these are all the rights which the migrant should possess. And that's why these two general conventions, covenants, becomes very relevant for our discussion. Then we have CEDAW, which Honorable Vice Chancellor had mentioned, that is on 189 countries have passed it. And then we have a convention on transnational organized crime, because the migration is directly correlated to organized crime. I'm not talking about criminal acts, organized crime, because the migrants become victim of the crime rather than perpetrators of the crime. Now, if you look at the two protocols, look at the names of those protocols, that is prevent, suppress, punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. So migrants are the most vulnerable group in the world, and protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. So therefore, the Transnational Organized Crime Convention tries to protect migrants against exploitation. Then there are some specific instruments for migrant women, and that is a convention on protection of rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. So that members of their families, where the woman fits into. Migrant worker also, she fits into that word also, because now the migration demography has changed. I'll come to that in the next slide. 46 countries have ratified it. It's very low in number. There is a need for improvement in that. And violence against migrant women, that is a resolution of 1994, Domestic Workers Convention, and Convention on Migrant Workers. So these are the few instruments that exist. But how these international conventions, resolutions, declarations gets implemented? We need an authority to implement them. So enforcing authorities are four. First one is International Organization on Migration, IOM. Then we have Commission on Status of Women, and then Commission on Human Rights, and then Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I must confess here, I must make a statement here that when you look into the United Nations enforcing authorities in capital sites, capital means financial acts, economic activities, they are very powerful organizations like IMF, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, WTO, World Trade Organizations. These are very powerful organizations. Anybody who violate their directions can easily be put under embargo and they could be punished. But same thing doesn't happen with human rights. So when it comes to human rights violations, the UN Commission on Human Rights is a very, very poor, toothless tiger who cannot do anything other than filing a report to the United Nations. Same happens with the status of women. So when recently when the UN Commission on Human Rights filed a report on India, India objected because they looked at condition of minority in India is not desirable. It's not the way it was supposed to exist. So India objected. So, but because of that, now you see Canada commenting upon farmers' bill protest. We have USA commenting on it. Now, these are all international pressure which is built on the state, and the state is made to protect the human rights. So, what these commissions, these enforcing authorities can do is can develop an international pressure on the state. Nothing more than that. But WTO and other thing, they don't build a pressure, they put restrictions. So that they are very powerful as compared to these authorities. So now from human rights conventions and enforcing authorities, now I'll move on to specifically woman-centered discussion on migration. And the name given for that is feminization of migration. The feminization of migration is migration has taken over feministic role. Feministic role because feminization of migration means the more and more female are getting migrated. Now look at the statistics. 19th and most part of the 20th century, 55% migrants were male. Last decade of 20th century and 21st century, 55% are women migrants. Now this is the world figure. In the morning, when Honorable Vice Chancellor was mentioning, in India, 42% are female who are migrating. So on compared to world average, Indian average is far below, where women migration is still low. So therefore, I can easily assume that in India, most of the migration is for proximity cause to join husband or a family. But whereas the international migration is not predominantly for that, it is something more than that. Feminization of migration has brought many positive effects to the concept of migration. Because woman is both independent economic actor where they come, they do the job, they earn. They can also be a dependent family member in the migration process, like a proximity, what I was mentioning. They can act in both capacities. So when they are acting in both capacities, there is an impact on the migration process. Now, women are becoming migrants for jobs and education purpose. Take the example of Bangalore. The most software engineers who migrate to Bangalore, they migrate as an unmarried woman. They don't marry and migrate, they migrate. Many people migrate for education. That's what Professor Dr. Shah was mentioning, that many people move to England to study and then they settle down there. So therefore, jobs and education is becoming main cause for the migration. And because of that, the proximity migration is reducing and independent economic migration is increasing. So another very interesting point here is migration is like a personal development opportunity for women. See, the migration may be of a downtrodden, uneducated woman, but it is still an opportunity for her because at her village, now take an example of a village setup. In a village setup, if a woman belongs to a particular caste or a community, she cannot go and wash utensils in others' house because it is below the dignity of that caste. So, but if it is she's in city after migration, here those restrictions don't apply to her. She can very well go and work. So therefore, they look at as an opportunity for personal development. They can learn, they can earn, they can always improve. And women look at migration as an escape route also, because what happens is a woman may be subjected to cruelty, domestic violence, threat, and she takes migration as an escape route to avoid all these things, domestic violence, unhappy marriage. She can come out of these things and join. So these are the possible reasons why there is a feminization of migration, and more people, more and more female are migrating than male. Now this is a fact for worldwide, but not so for India. So India will catch up soon. So it's a matter of another 10 years where a real feminization migration you will going to see. But what I see is already the metropolitan cities are already having feminization of migration. But whereas the migration for low class people, unskilled labor is still male dominated. So when you look into feminization, that majority of the people who migrate are domestic workers. Worldwide, it's a domestic workers because the countries like aging populations like Europe, they need domestic help for survival. Take the example of India. Kerala and Tamil Nadu are aging states. The Bihar is the youngest state of India, because the maximum number of people are found between the age group of 20 to 25. That's the youngest state in India. Most aged is Tamil Nadu, second aged is Kerala. Now, people would migrate to those places because their domestic help is required because of their aging state. Then the growth of service industries like hotel, hospitality industries, also there is a raise in a demand for women workers, because there are certain work which only women can do in a service sector. So that's the reason why there is a growing demand for feminization of migration. Migrant woman is a unique agent of social change, and how she brings a change in the society, I will deal it in the coming slides. So now I'll come to a very interesting discussion, that is fault line in studies. When we study migration, we make mistakes. The basic mistake that we make, I'm trying to highlight now. There are certain fault lines that lies with our studies. When we study migration, we make a macro level study, like history of migration, the reasons for migration. Now, this is all a macro level study where we generally understand the process, a phenomenon called migration. But we lack micro level community-based study of migration, because we need to know the impact on each family, how migration affects a family. Because this micro level study helps in making a very proactive and most needed policy for protecting migrant workers, especially women migrants. So micro level study is the need of the hour. Economic impact of migration can be studied easily, but what about social impact? How migration impacts society? How migration impacts a family? That needs to be studied, because the impact of migration or social impact of migration cannot be felt immediately. It is a slow process. It can be felt in the passing of time. So that's why when it's a slow process, it has to be studied for a longer duration. And that is what we are failing. That is where the fault line in our studies lie. So when you look into measuring how the migration affects women, this again, the impact study has not been done, and there is a very dire need for those impact study. I'm going to give you few criteria on which the study could be made. The first criteria is how much a woman has a share of wages in the employment. Now, when you study her share of the wages, then you'll come to know the level of exploitation. It's supposed to be 50-50. Male and female must share 50-50 of the wages of the company. If it is not so, then how much it is lopsided, how much more the male earns. That is one study that has to be made. How much of flexibility is there in the labor market? Now, people should be allowed to quit the job, get into another job, learn new skill, go to another job. There should be a lot of flexibility for women in the employment. Now, if there is more flexibility, more adaptability, that means the woman is safer and woman can work better. Total fertility rate. Now, the fertility rate is very, very important study because economic independence of women is inversely correlated to fertility rate. The more independent woman is, the more economically sound the woman is, fertility rate goes down because she becomes a decision maker. She, as a woman, decides when she's going to use her body to bring a new one into the world. Otherwise, it becomes a decision of the family. So that's why the fertility rate needs to be studied. Under 5 mortality rate, that is the how many children die within 5 years of age. That is again a very important indicator which we need to study. Now, if we do well in all these studies, then feminization of migration is doing well for women. If not, then there is need for a policy, there is a need for a law to protect them. Nutritional status of children is another indicator which we need to study. Contraceptive prevalence rate. Now, how many contraceptives are sold in the locality? That's again a very important study to show that women are decision makers and migrant women are gaining more control over the family. So Amartya Sen also came up with a few suggestions on the studying the feminization of migration and impact of that. Now he says decision-making power of women should be studied, whether it's expanding or shrinking. That's one study that has to be made. Then second thing is her ability to choose freely without violence, retribution or fear. Now, for example, if a woman decides to go back to her state of origin, a lady in Goa decides to go back to Bihar. Now, her decision should be respected by the family members. She should not have a fear. She should not have a threat of violence. She should not have overthrowing her decision and imposing a decision by another person. So that is another ability we have to see. Then increased women's economic, social roles. That's again another important area we have to see, that whether her role is being increased in the society. Now, there are a few advantages of feminization. That is, it improves autonomy, human capital, and self-esteem of female. Migrant female sends more money back home than the male counterpart. Male migration does not lower fertility, but female migration does. Now, that's a very interesting observation. So, when female migrate, the fertility rate goes down. But when the male migrates, it remains same. Now, if you look at this remittance, now remittance means sending money from host state to family in the origin state. Now, here you can see there is a woman working in a migrant woman working in a host state, and here there is another woman with a child taking care of her family in the state of origin. Now, remittance is sending money. Now, here is a man in a host state working as a migrant labor, and on the right there is a female who is working as a man taking care of the family. So now what I'm trying to do is I'm making a comparative study of female sending money to a female male sending a money to female or male. Now, if you look at money sent by a woman to another woman, the amount would be more, utilization would be more, benefit to the family should be more. But when a woman sends money to a male counterpart in the state of origin, then the utilization for the family benefit would be less. Money sent would be more, family beneficial would be less. To give you an example, I have observed that in Goa during lockdown, there was a woman working as a maid. She used to earn 9,000 rupees a month. She was with 3 children. Husband was stuck in Nepal because he could not come because of a lockdown. Now, the most astonishing part of the whole story is she was earning 9,000. She was sending 5,000 rupees to her husband in Nepal. In 4,000, she and 3 children were surviving. Now, one man needed 5,000 and 4 human beings survived on 4,000. That's the level of commitment that you see among women. But if a man is sending, first of all, he sends lesser money. He won't send the same amount as woman does. But when it sends to another man, utilization is further less because he has to use it for his own personal purpose. But if it sends to a woman, then the money would be utilized to the maximum extent. That is the remittance business. That's the economy of remittance. So remittances helps when woman sends to a woman. When a man sends, he sends less money and it reaches less to the, even lesser to the family. Now, constraints of migrations, there are many constraints, problems with migration because of double discrimination, which women suffer. She suffers a double discrimination as one as a woman, other as a migrant. Then social and gender norms are another problem for women because society may not agree for her migration, family may not agree for her migration. That becomes a major problem and she has to fight against this social and gender norms. Female-headed families, they experience less access to resources because money is never sent to a female, it is sent to another male counterpart in the state of origin. Migrant women have a higher rate of unemployment as compared to local woman or a migrant male because the first preference is given to locals, migrant male, then the local female, and then they move on to the other people. So that's how the migrant women have a higher unemployment rate. And another reason for a high unemployment rate is because they come unplanned. They come as a proximity as a cost. They come to join the husband, and after that, why they can't earn also to help the husband. So that's why the employment becomes a problem. The another major problem is the underemployment. The qualified women are generally underemployed. A family which migrated from Goa to Canada, the husband had a job, so he migrated. Wife joined him, went with him, and now she was an advocate, practicing advocate in Goa, but now there she is working as a legal assistant. Underemployment. Now why? Because she did not plan her job, but it was because of her husband she has moved. So underemployment becomes a major problem. So major problem is recruitment agencies. These agencies exploit people. Domestic work are not covered by employment laws. The laws that we studied under Dr. Shah and Honorable Judge, they are not covered. Domestic work generally are not covered. Then female migrants are forced into prostitution, and sexual favors are required for family survival. This is another major problem with migration. And there is no reliable access to health care and reproductive health care. Migrant women are vulnerable for violence, and absence of social fabric makes them more vulnerable. Now, if a domestic violence happens in a state of origin where they are born and brought up, now there they have her family, husband's family, relatives, elders, they all can come together and bring a resolution to the problem. But when they are in migration, when they are in a host state, they have nobody to rely upon. So in absence of that social fabric or social cushioning, the marriage breakdown or exploitation increases. So that's the vulnerability increases for a migrant woman. So there are ill effects of migration where migration itself is not a solution because it has more problem for state of origin. Social network, that's what I was mentioning in the beginning of my presentation. There, the culture of migration builds in very fast. So people start looking at migration as the only solution for their problems. They stop looking for other solutions. So once the social networking is done, the migration increases and it can never be controlled. So economic migration is a personal choice. But whereas there are other migrations which are not their personal choice, like military conflict or climate change, other things. Now, the worst problem is the woman returning to her origin, state of origin, because she would not be given a capitalization of her own skill, knowledge gained. The host state must be giving her all the opportunities, but the state of origin will not give those same opportunities. Take the example of a beauty parlor. A woman working in a beauty parlor has learned so many skills which are very, very valuable one. But once she migrates back to her hometown, it would be of no use because of a level of development in their areas. So that's the major problem with the ill effect of migration. And it negatively impacts the child's health and education because of a broken family. Now, there is one major social conflict between feminism of migration and society. See what happens when a woman moves to a new state, which is a developed state. There is a better living conditions. So what she see, which she has not seen her whole life, is a gender equality. It would be surprising for her to see when she's working that husband asking a permission from a wife. That is a cultural shock. She would be looking into broader social attitudes. She would be looking into education, childcare, maternity health, family planning. Now, all these things she's seeing it for the first time. She's learning from it. And once she learns from it, she will try to implement in her family. When she goes back to state of origin, she tries to implement all these things for the betterment of the family. But she would be resisted. She would face resistance because they find these are things are against their family ethos. Now that is the major problem. And what is being studied and what it has been found is a migrant woman, once she goes back to her host state, or state of origin, she would be the one who would be opposing all the practices which are against the human nature, which are against the human health, like female genital mutilation, which is prevalent in many tribal communities, which is prevalent in many religious communities. She would be opposing it because she has seen that such things doesn't exist in other places. So therefore, there is social conflict and feminist migration, and it is bound to happen. Now what we need is we need to look into these problems and try to frame the possible policies. So there are few recommendations which I have. One is we should ensure full human rights for a woman migrant. We need to provide them access to financial institution, which has improved a lot recently. Non-discrimination access to labor market, which is very difficult to achieve because locals discrimination always exists. Support migrants before, during, and after migration, and even after returning from the migration. All stages of migration should be covered by the policy. Offer or encourage the community education, awareness, and training. Regulate and monitor recruitment agencies, because recruitment agencies are the major cause for exploitation. There is a sensitization of human rights is required for migrants as well as for the agencies and the companies. Increase public awareness, recognition of benefits for migration, that is what is required. And the host state must appreciate the contribution of the migrants for the development of the country, of their state. So once when we were having a program on child rights, one of the participants stood up and said that whatever you're talking about, the risk of the children generally happens to the migrant children. Our children are safe at home. That's the way they look at it. It is their problem. If the children of migrants are at risk, it is their problem. But who is the direct beneficiary of the migrants' presence in the state? Is the local population. So that we need to understand, and it's the state's duty to disseminate that information, that how much benefit we have drawn from the migrant community. Regulating the domestic work, having a law on a domestic work is a very important need of the hour. And we need a migration study project. We need to study the project all over India, especially keeping women as a center, and then try to understand how this project could be implemented. Support migrant women after returning home, which was I mentioned in the earlier slide, and encourage husbands to take the household and caretaking responsibilities. I'm sorry to say that the whole world is developing, moving forward, and the only person is left behind is husband, not man. Man is improving, only husband is not improving, and that is where the husband needs to be well aware and understand his position and try to adopt. Lack of female representation in the government level is another problem, which is again, it is a macro issue, needs to be dealt separately. Investing on education of women is very important. As I mentioned, that it also have all the important economic independence brings decrease in fertility rate, decrease in infant mortality rate, decrease in health concerns, decrease of poverty levels. So all these advantages you get. So if at all there is some change you see in the state of origin, like Bihar and other thing, it has time to grab it and make it reality. Because if women are not given support, then all the advantage that she has gained through this migration process would evaporate into thin air. So that is what we need to ensure, that it doesn't get lost, it is protected. Migration is a necessary evil that you have to keep in mind. We need to take a decision whether to discourage migration, work towards it, how to work towards discouraging migration, equal development of all states, equal opportunity for all the people, reduction of disparity among the states, overall development. Migration comes down. If you want to keep migration and regulate it, then you need to understand that there is going to be a cosmopolitan existence in the state. So there won't be any uniqueness of any state. So you will be seeing all the festivals being celebrated in a state. Chhat Puja would be celebrated in Kolhapur. There is going to be a Durga Puja in Goa. Now these are the things that are going to happen if the migration is encouraged. To make the liberalization, privatization, and globalization a reality, what they have allowed now is movement of capital. From one country to another country, money moves easily, but labor don't move easily because they need a visa, passport, and other thing. So, and then green card. So all these problems exist with LPG. So to make it LPG a reality, we need this labor movement, shift labor movement all over the world. And with this, I'm coming to an end of my presentation. And thank you very much for the opportunity given. I feel that I have done justice to the topic that was given to me. I hope I have not failed in my job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would not say that you've done justice to the topic. I would say you've done more than the justice. Though it is a sad state of affairs for women migrants, I think your presentation was absolutely phenomenal. And on that note, I would call upon Patki sir, Suhas Patki sir, to deliver the vote of thanks. But before that, I would like to ask the participants if they have any questions for the resource person.
Hello,
if anyone
Dr.
has any
Patil.
questions.
Hello, Dr. Patil. How are you? Principal speaking. Dr. Narayana speaking, Principal.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Yeah. I'm fine, sir. I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Fine. Very fruitful session. Much more benefited. I think that all the participants in the seminar have taken much more time also. And really, we are appreciable for your enrichment of work.
Thank you.
And in future also, we will be in touch with you, sir.
Yes, sir. And thank you for the opportunity, sir.
No, sir. It's a great pleasure.
Okay. So I would like to request Professor Suhas Patki sir, please express the vote of thanks.
Sir, you have managed to come inside the home now.
As long as you look on migration as a problem, as something to solve you, you are not going to get anywhere. You have to look at as a human reality that's too old as humankind. It's mankind's oldest poverty reduction strategy. As citizens, we have to find a way to manage it. Thank you, Dr. B.S. Patil, sir, Associate Professor, V.M. Salgaonkar, College of Law, Panjim, Goa, for enlightening us on the topic migration, a challenge to women rights, socio issues, and politico-economic redressal. Sir has rightly divided the topic in 11 thoughts. Sir has focused on crime committed by one migrant against another, migration as a double-edged weapon, personal development opportunity for women, domestic violence of migrant women, reasons for migration, micro-level study of migration, nutrition, concentration migration, effects of migration, problems after returning to original place, feminization of migration and social conflict, and suggested recommendations for protecting migrant women's rights, so and so on forth. Thank you very much, sir, on behalf of Council of Education, Shahaji Law College, Kolhapur, National Commission for Women, New Delhi, and participants of the webinar for sharing your ideas in this webinar on migrant women workers and labor laws, identifying gaps and exploring legal remedies. Thank you once again. Over to you, Dr. Suchita, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Now I call upon Dr. Praveen Patil, sir, the convener of the national webinar, to deliver an overview of the webinar as well as vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, madam. Respected resource persons, respected members of the management, participants from across India, faculty from my own college, my student friends, and everyone who is associated with this seminar. I stand here to report the day-long proceedings of the webinar and to propose vote of thanks. As you all witnessed, we began this webinar by offering our respect and salute to the founding father of the Council of Education, Deshbhakt, late Dr. Ratnapanna Kumbar. He is rightly known as Bhagya Vidata of this region for the reasons stated in the opening remarks by Honorable Vice Chancellor of Karnataka State Law University, Dr. Ishwar Bhatt. His resourceful opening remarks were sprouting seeds for the day-long activity. I, on behalf of our management and Shahaji Law College, thank him for the keynote address. Thank you, sir. The first session was by Sri Pankaj Deshpande, Honorable Judge and Secretary of District Legal Services Authority, Kolhapur. His immense knowledge and practical grip on the topic made us rich today in terms of awareness. I, on behalf of management and Shahaji Law College, thank him for the address. Thank you, sir. The second session was by Advocate Santosh Shah, who is a renowned advocate and a famous jurist. Indeed, it's a matter of pride for all of us that he is our alumnus. His resourceful lecture and a touch of practical sensitivity to the topic filled the core of this webinar. I, on behalf of our management and Shahaji Law College thank him for his address. Thank you, sir. We had an eminent scholar and popular professor, Dr. B.S. Patil, Associate Professor, Salgaonkar Law College, for the third session. He is known for his clinical teaching and the belief of law on ground rather than law in racks. He thoroughly elaborated the pertinent problems and noteworthy solutions on the problems of migrant women workers. I, on behalf of our management and Shahaji Law College, thank him for the said lecture. Thank you, sir. We are profusely benefited by all the sessions, and therefore, once again, I extend my gratitude to all of the above resource persons. The major chunk of attention should invariably go to the National Commission for Women, who sponsored and funded this webinar. It would not have been possible in this testing time of COVID to organize such national level event without the support of National Commission for Women. I take this opportunity to thank the Commission, knowing fully well that I can't thank them enough. I thank Sir Rajnitai Magdum, President, Council of Education, Sri Prasad Kamath, Vice President, Council of Education, Advocate V.N. Patil, Secretary, Council of Education, Dr. Vishwanath Magdum, Member, Council of Education, Advocate Vaibhav Pednekar, Member, Council of Education, for immense support and constant encouragement. Thank you everyone there. I thank our principal, Dr. R. Narayana, Dr. Rasam, Dr. Sheikh, Professor Patki, Dr. Suchita Madam, Dr. Ashmita Patil, Sri Kailash Pawar, Professor Desai, and all members of non-teaching staff for helping each other and making this webinar a grand success. It would not have been possible without their support. Thank you, everyone present there. Special thanks to Professor Biradar from Karnataka State Law University, who took the entire responsibility of technical support for this webinar. I, on behalf of our management and Shahaji Law College, thank him for the said support. Thank you, sir. Last but not the least, I thank all the participants who were the cynosure of this webinar. My special thanks to Dr. Ashmita Patil and Dr. Suchita Surgihalli for comparing this seminar in a wonderful manner. I thank everyone. Have a great day ahead. And there is a notice. Please fill the feedback available in the chat box to receive the certificate. Thank you, everyone.
They can. Thank you, everyone. You can fill up the feedback forms and kindly also leave the meeting. Thank you.